And welcome everybody to episode 2 of the Steel Download podcast. I'm Dan here with Gabe, joining us here from probably going to be the new studio for now. So Gabe, thank you for joining us. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Great preseason win. Skylar Thompson looked great, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you betcha. Really cool to have people. Just have guys with you. Have some fun with it. But yes, Thompson did really well. I'll say. I mean, we saw that thing, of Rogers kind of getting taped up in the ankle. It looked like, and kind of figured
hmm
it happened sooner than later, but here we are now.
Yeah, it's interesting given his age. I'm curious to see where Thompson ends up. Most teams only carry three at quarterback. I would be stunned if Will Howard was cut, and I'd be stunned if anything happened to Mason Rudolph. Maybe Mason Rudolph gets traded, but cool to see a guy go out and perform like that. I think he at least guaranteed himself a quarterback three spot on some NFL team if he can't fit on the Steelers depth chart.
Yeah, even if he's not here, he'll go somewhere, 233 yards and just the way that he kind of played. Pittsburgh, too, what I really was happy to see was they had that consistent scoring. Not a single quarter went by where they didn't put points on the board.
Yeah, another thing was offensively. If you look at, they call him in Pittsburgh Mount Washington, named after, of course, the famous mountain right behind or right adjacent to Acrisure Stadium. Big 6'7" tight end. He looked impressive in the preseason game, which he's a guy I've kind of had an X mark on this season, thinking of what is his role going to be. And then they trade for Jonnu Smith, and it's like, what snaps is he going to get? What kind of roles he going to have in this offense? Feels like there's still a lot of untapped potential there. And there's, of course, that question in the back of your mind of, can he move the tackle? I mean, it might be a little too late in his career to do that. But, I think if you look at, comparatively, Broderick Jones' size compared to him, Darnell Washington is a bigger player than Broderick Jones, which is nuts to think about. But I thought he played well. He had a nice touchdown grab. He's gonna be a guy I look at for the season. I mean, the preseason's very hard because you don't want to knock a player for doing well, but also as Steeler fans, I mean, we saw Kenny Pickett ball out against the Buccaneers, against the Falcons in those preseason games a couple of years ago. So I think it's just acknowledging, a player played great, but that does not mean that it's going to be consistent through the regular season. So at least I'm
Oh,
not going
for
to try
sure.
and overreact.
For sure. Yeah, Skyler went out there, he balled. I mean, quarterbacks was really going to be interesting for the Steelers. I mean, Kenny kind of aged like milk. We saw how that went with us. It didn't go the way we planned, but they're going to be going next week. They'll play Tampa, who themselves they've had some good quarterbacks. Kyle Trask, Connor Bazelak, shout out Bowling Green. Um, they balled out last week when Tampa was able to get their victory. So really, too, it's just anywhere you could go there, and I mean it's going to be great to be back in Heinz Field.
For sure, it is. I'm hoping I can get to a game this year. I've been able to get to games the last 2 years. Last year was Kansas City at that Christmas game, which wasn't great. Then the year before that was Jacksonville. So actually, now that I think about it, maybe I should stop going because every time I go, this team just does not perform.
Well,
But nonetheless, great to get back to Acrisure. In my opinion, top five stadium in the NFL, one of the best traditions in the NFL. But it is a tradition that, is showing some signs of weaknesses. Some fans are starting to question everything. The Rooney's leadership as owners, Coach Tomlin's leadership as head coach, and even Omar Khan's direction as GM and Andy Weil's direction as assistant GM. Even though, it wasn't too long ago that, that Chase Claypool trade happened and, everyone in Pittsburgh was screaming from the top of their lungs, the con artist. So we'll see what happens. Definitely a lot of eager Steeler fans that are just looking for that all elusive playoff win. I know I am, and I'm sure you are, Dan, because when they last
oh,
won a
for
playoff
sure,
game, we
brother.
were like 10 or 9 years old. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
it's funny. Like I mentioned in one of my SME articles, I was in third grade the last time we won a playoff game, and I'm going into college this year, so yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, I haven't. I've only been to one Steelers game in my life. I'm going to when the Browns come to town. That's going to be a fun one this year. But the 23rd
It's
game where
always
we had
fun, man.
It was Mason Rudolph versus I believe Jake Browning for the Bengals, and it was unbelievable, just onto
That
the edge of
was,
your seat.
yeah.
And it was after the Arizona and New England, the kind of fumbles almost, and you just go back and have that. It was spectacular. But yeah, it's
And yeah, that was the game. That was the game that the GP revenge game, I like to call it, where he kind of silenced all the doubters. Had some issues there and had a good game. So we'll see. Hopefully, DK can replicate that during the season. I mean, pretty much the same archetype in terms of receiver. It kind of makes you wonder, like, the Steelers front office was like, yeah, we really like what we got here. We need a physical body for our quarterback to trust in the red zone or trust in situations where, you have that one-on-one coverage and that keep defenses respectable. Um, I'd love to get your thoughts on the GP trade because, for my opinion, like, I showed up to that Kansas City game, and I remember me and my dad got there really early. And in fact, now after that report came out that GP showed up to the game like an hour and a half before the game started, I'm pretty sure I was at that game before George Pickens was, and he was also on the injured list and was supposed to report. But I mean, I think he'll do well in Dallas. I think it's something that he's playing with the best quarterback he's ever played with in his entire career, and I think we could easily agree upon that. I don't think Dak is a otherworldly quarterback, but when you compare it to what he had in Pittsburgh, I think he should be good. But how do you feel about the whole
well,
George Pickens departure,
that
Dan?
that's good, man. I guess kind of like with the QB, it's kind of like instead of like almost going from like a tier 3 restaurant, you're going to a tier 2 one. Like don't want to say like names of places or whatever, but just kind of looking at it, diva receivers and the Steelers have gone together. Like I don't feel like we've had a hardworking receiver, who's just been humble and dedicated since Hines Ward. And it's unfortunate to say, but I feel like too, Pickens had his time where he, blossomed with the black and gold, but there were some issues. And we saw issues too, like if you remember back with Antonio Brown, where he was kind of having his tantrums and all that, and they had a phony knee injury, and then he ended up getting shipped off to Oakland at the time, now Las Vegas. But yeah, the Pickens trade, I feel like it had to happen. It was going to happen eventually, but we'll just have to see how he works out now with Jerry Jones and the Cowboys.
Yeah, we'll see. They got a lot of their issues, but one thing, like sticking on receivers, I think going into the Tampa Bay game and really throughout the preseason, I want a sign of hope with Roman Wilson. I know he had some moments in the Jacksonville game, but I'm waiting for 90 plus receiving yard game, touchdown, really shows that route running ability and the ability to beat man coverage, which we saw at Michigan. I mean, really, I just have a lot of question marks about this receiving room, and I think the Steelers do too. Like, I mean, they're trying to. I saw they were interested in Jawan Jennings. I don't know if that's really going to happen, but to me, there's got to be another guy here that's got to step up. I love Calvin Austin. I like his play style, but I don't think that's really a guy you can rely on to be a wide receiver number two. So, how do you feel about the wide receiver number two conundrum the Steelers have been in ever since they traded away Deontay? Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Deontay a little bit at the first. I didn't like where he went to college, but Deontay, he had his time, and he was kind of a guy that was able to step up, make plays. Never was, the star of the show, but he still, put in that work ethic. But the thing with Pittsburgh too is they were always a defense first team. You take it back to the '70s, Steel Curtain, Blitzburg in the '90s. Then you have Joey Porter. You go along. Now you have T.J. Watt. Now you have Cam Hayward, Ryan Shazier for a small point. It's sad what happened to him, but still he had great potential. It's unfortunate, but Pittsburgh's never been on the offensive side of the ball. Like their defense has always dominated their offense, if there makes sense. And then when you even split it up further and
Yeah.
you go offense to defense, Pittsburgh always had a strong run game. You had Jerome Bettis in the 2000s, going a little bit into 2010s. Then you had Le'Veon Bell keeping it rolling along, and then you had Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. And I'm hot take here. You might disagree with me. I prefer Jalen Warren over Najee Harris any day of the week, and that's before I was saying that before Najee got traded. But it's just been difficult too for Steelers receivers, almost to get their flowers, I feel like in some ways, and they're kind of trying to figure that out right now in the offense room, but offense really starts with the quarterback position, and we haven't been able to get that figured out yet. So we just got to get there first, Gabe.
Yeah, I definitely I agree with the Jalen Warren take. If you look at yards per carry, definitely more of an efficient runner for Pittsburgh. I never really liked the Najee Harris draft pick in general. Felt like putting a band-aid on an issue that needed a lot of fixing, aka the offensive line after that 2020 season was just filled with a bunch of players that were aging, like Villanueva, Pouncey, just a couple of those players that were getting old. Pouncey, of course, retired after that 2020 year. They had a lot of issues, and they sort of went with the Najee Harris pick, the positional pick, and I felt like they didn't really want to address the bigger issue, and then they drafted Kendrick Green, and then as a guard and then moved into center, and then that was a disaster. But I feel like this front office has really, ever since Colbert has left, I feel like it's been a nice breath of fresh air. The ability to take offensive linemen early in the draft is something this team's needed to do for a while. And then I know Shadur Sanders looked good against Carolina, but I was terrified that we were going to take Shadur Sanders in the first round. I desperately wanted some defensive line help. I watched that Ravens game, and I've watched every single Steelers playoffs loss since 2015. Those playoff losses where we go down like 21-0, 28-0 in the first half. And a lot of that is because our run defense just isn't there. So I was really happy to see that. Now, unfortunately, there's a bit of a roadblock in our way of hopefully stopping the run is Cam Hayward. He wants a new contract. He wants more money. And you know what? From his standpoint, I understand. I think I saw that for his position, he's the 22nd highest paid player at his position. I agree with him. He was unbelievable last year. I had my doubts when Omar Khan gave him that contract. I'm like, oh, he's 35, 34 years old. Like, this has the potential to go terribly, Dan. But then he goes out there and he balls out, first team All Pro. So I don't blame him. I think he should be willing to get paid out. I think things should be fine. I think there is a potential he sits out games, but I think he should be back by the bye week and, hopefully in that defensive rotation for the ramp up of the season towards the playoffs.
Yeah, and one of the things too I've always liked about Cam Hayward is he's really been, a a pinnacle of the Steelers standard, and what it means to don the black and gold. So it kind of surprised me, I guess, when he was asking for it, but I feel like it's less of like a Le'Veon Bell situation where he's just demanding and demanding and demanding and more, me, and more of a like a, hey, I've busted my rear end for this team for so long. All I'm asking is just for a little more, man. Can you give it to me? And I feel like he definitely deserves it. At the end of the day, I hope that Khan gives it to him, but we're just gonna have to wait and see. And through the draft too, I mean, I'm kind of glad. Shador looks pretty good in Cleveland. He was obviously one of the more hyped prospects. Fell to the fifth round, but beyond that, I'm really grateful and glad that we selected Fontanu last season and now in this season Harmon to be able to get them. We're really putting the steps together to build a good offensive line.
Yeah, that's the key. I mean, you look at some of these teams, Philadelphia, even Kansas City with their great interior offensive line. The teams that win, they have great quarterback play, but they also have incredible offensive lines. The level of versatility you can have, you can switch to run, switch to pass. I mean, we were just at the end of that 2020 season, it was brutal because his team could not run the ball to save their life. It was just a short pass game because that's the only thing they could do. Now, of course, they were limited with Ben's mobility. They really couldn't do much there. And even his arm, his arm talent by that point in his career, he wasn't throwing the ball 60 yards accurate anymore. But it's nice to see this front office is changing a bit. I know we talked about in the podcast with us three, me, you, and Shmi, about a week ago. I don't know if we were on the air for it or not, but one of the most interesting things to me was the Mika Fitzpatrick trade. I thought Mika Fitzpatrick was a cornerstone on this franchise. I specifically remember on a podcast, Mike Tomlin saying, they asked him, why do you want to do this still? You've made tons of money from coaching. You've won a Super Bowl with the Steelers, won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. You've had a lot of success coaching. What makes you still hungry and still putting in the hours to be the best head coach you can? And he essentially, this isn't word for word, but he essentially said, I'm doing it for Mika. I'm doing it for TJ. I'm doing it for Cam. And what does he mean by that? He wants to win a Super Bowl. And the fact that he mentioned Mika Fitzpatrick in that same sentence, I thought that meant he was untouchable. And given his production in some of the seasons with Pittsburgh, I mean, this guy was the best secondary player I've ever seen with the Steelers. One of my gripes on the Steelers, I mean, when we were growing up, Dan, we had to
Mhm.
watch. I mean, Artie Burns, Season just Mike Mitchell, like a collection of guys that were not great at the secondary position. So they traded for Mika. I'm like, dude, we finally got a good secondary player. And then he was awesome in 2019, had some
Mhm.
injuries, then had a great year again, then was kind of banged up again. I'm curious to see your perspective on it because Steeler Nation seems to be divided, where one half says, okay, he's so good, teams don't want to throw the ball to him, so he just doesn't have production. But on the other
Mhm.
half, it's like, yeah, Mika's not the same player anymore. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say, there's two moments where I feel like I kind of, when I was writing an article, for Smee, this was one of the things that when I'm covering the Steelers for him that, I was one of the things I had to write about is, well, first off, when we had our QB predictions, it was Will Howard versus Mason Rudolph. Who are the Steelers going to get? 2 hours later, after I post it, we go and get Aaron Rodgers. So I was not a happy camper at that. And so I'm kind of like, I'm a little bit like skeptical still, like what's going on. And when they pulled that, I'm going to be honest, I was pissed. Like, it's just, there's no better way to say it. I was really frustrated. I've never been a huge Jalen Ramsey fan. And of course, I mean, I'm not going to throw shade at one of my team's players right now. I wasn't a huge fan of him in LA. I remember watching him in Jacksonville growing up. He was unstoppable. We don't have Jacksonville Jalen. We have Jalen that's kind of just getting by at this point using his recognition from previous seasons. Rodgers is kind of doing the same thing. It's just what you have, at this time, but I feel like there is also a lot of room for growth. I mean, Salt and Pepper is kind of just the way like Jonnu Smith Jonnu, Arthur Smith, the way they kind of roll. You knew they were going to get together at some point. So I'll say I'm optimistic for what the Steelers defense could look like, but I'm not going to I'm still going to be a little bit, okay, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I was pretty distraught because a lot of Steeler fans want this team to rebuild. And, I kind of agree with that. But I've kind of come to the point where the organization doesn't want to do it and they're not going to commit to it. However, I thought in 2019, this team really had an opportunity to potentially get a top 10 pick. If Ben goes down with an injury, they don't have their franchise quarterback. There was an opportunity there. They could have kept their first round pick, and there were guys like Herbert was in that draft, Tua was in that draft. There, whether you like Tua or not, I think we can all agree that he was better. He's better than Kenny Pickett. He was better than Mitch Trubisky was for our
Hmm.
team. But I thought it was interesting. They decided no, we still want to keep winning, and they traded that first round pick for Mika Fitzpatrick. So I find it, kind of came full circle. Like, dang, like we gave up that opportunity and we got a couple good years of Mika just to trade him again. I mean, we'll see. They nailed the safety position last year in free agency by signing Deshaun Elliott. And I felt like during the first half of last season, I felt like Deshaun Elliott was playing better than Mika Fitzpatrick. I felt like Deshaun Elliott was playing like a top five safety in the league. Now, granted, their positions are a little different. He's more in the box, but if you talk about just value added to the team, Deshaun Elliott was unbelievable last year.
Oh yeah, he
His
was.
production wasn't quite the same towards the end of the season, but even still, the contract they got him on and what you were expecting, it was pretty unbelievable. Another guy defensively, I was stunned when they got rid of him, Dan, was Landon
Hmm.
Roberts. I mean, this guy
Hmm.
was the hum on defense. Like we had Bob Spillane a couple of years ago. The Steelers let him go. And really, I mean, he filled in perfectly for him and was our stopping ground. If we needed to stop the run, Landon Roberts was in the game, and it felt like he was going to do it every time. So, how did you feel about that? I know they brought in Malik Harrison from the Ravens,
Yeah.
who's supposed to be kind of a similar archetype of player, but how do you feel about that, man? I was kind of surprised by that
Yeah.
too.
I was a little surprised, confused. I remember last year, getting Patrick Queen. I was really excited when we got him from Baltimore. It was kind of just a, ha ha, you get Derrick Henry, but we're gonna get this. So I really liked when
Mm-hmm.
we got Queen, but too, it is a thing, that I feel like Pittsburgh kind of held on to Big Ben, and he's a great quarterback. He brought us a couple rings, and I think what was it? He got two Super Bowl wins before he like was 24 or something crazy like that. Like no other QB has ever really done that. And, he's like he was at the time of his retirement. I think he was like fifth all time in passing yards and a bunch of other stats. So he's definitely going to be, in Canton sooner than later. But if you looked at those quarterback drafts, 2018, 2019, 2020, like you were saying with the Minka one, where they had Tua or Herbert. And I mean, Tua probably should retire at this point, but that's for another day. Justin Herbert hasn't had the greatest statistics. What really irks me is when we didn't try to go for quarterback in 2018 with Lamar Jackson, because I know the way it seems unlikely looking back, but I feel like it would have been really cool to get him just kind of, if he would have been able to work in the system and been able to kind of be under Ben, be under somebody who's been there. Whether or not Ben's a good leader is up for debate. We've heard, Emmanuel Sanders come out and say things. We've heard Antonio Brown say things. But we don't really know the man because we're just fans, We're not in the locker room with him every day, or we weren't. And then just kind of looking at that too, as if you look at the 2020 draft, like you're mentioning as well, second round, just won a Super Bowl ring. So, I mean, it's just so difficult to draft. And I will say though, I ever since the Kenny Pickett debacle, Pittsburgh has kind of taken a little more of a approach of just being more mindful when they draft. They're not going for that big name sexy player. They're just going for what they need at the time.
I don't think that Lamar Jackson, looking back, I mean, hindsight is now, but I think the Steelers tried to do a similar thing. I don't remember the exact draft class he came out of, and I know he was drafted much later than Lamar, but Josh Jobs, I felt like coming out of Tennessee was not Lamar Jackson, but in terms of his skill set and being able to use his legs to create a lot of separation and create big plays for your offense, I thought that was very similar. And the Steelers did value that at a time. But yeah, I mean, part of the reason why we had to go through this sort of retool through the early 2020s was because the Steelers held on to Ben for so long. And you know what? Like, you can argue whether it was a smart decision or not all day. It probably wasn't. But one thing is for certain is the Steelers hold on to their players, and it's part of the tradition and the culture. They held on to Hines Ward. They held on to Polamalu. They held on to Ben. That's why I think they're going to hold on to Cam, because Cam is like one of the longest tenured Steelers on the team. I'm almost positive he is. I think it's him and Boz are like right up there, and then TJ. But I'm almost positive they're going to keep him, and that's one of the best things about being a Steeler fan is that for the most part, your favorite players are not going to go. Again, that's why I was so taken aback by the Mika trade. But again, Mika wasn't drafted by the Steelers, so maybe that's why I'm not really sure. But I think one thing for sure, taking care of their players. I think Cam stays for sure. But I guess another thing I wanted to talk about is what are your? I know you've written about it a little bit on Shmi Sports. Go make sure to go check out Dan's articles if you haven't. Talk about a little bit more about your expectations for this season. A lot of Steeler fans are I feel like at this point, we're all fans. We all wanted the team to do
Hmm.
good, but the expectation of like hoping players are going to break out, I feel like fans have gotten a little more conservative. What are you expecting? This could be record, playoff success, fingers crossed, or even just individual players breaking out.
That's a good question. And when I wrap up, I'm gonna flip it back to you because I want to know as well. I'd say I'm hoping I called a 10 and second 7 record. Looking back, I feel like some of the games I'd flip flop around. Like what gave us going 0 2 to Baltimore, but even in some of our off years when they were real dominant, with Lamar Jackson and moving, and they were borderline unstoppable, and then just fall to the Chiefs. I mean, it happens, but even then Pittsburgh was able to pull wins and get that. So I feel like they might win against Baltimore this year, whether at Heinz Field or on the road in Baltimore. But I'm expecting a 10 and 7 record. I was expecting Rodgers to start. Whether or not that happens, I couldn't tell you honestly. I wouldn't be that upset if Mason Rudolph start. I mean, I'm kind of in the minority where I kind of like Rudolph, and I feel like he's had his moments where he's been able to step up. Now, is he the long term solution? No, but if we can get him reps and have Will Howard, who got thrown into the Ohio State coming out of Syracuse, and then he's holding a national championship right now, and he's with his best buddy Jack Sawyer. which I was really ecstatic about. That was my one favorite pick, I'd say, of not just this year, but of probably the past two or three, was getting Jack Sawyer. I really love seeing that for our defense. And, as a bit of an Ohio State fan, I mean, I like that a lot. So it was cool to see him. I'm expecting our defense to kind of not really be there, in some aspects. I'm expecting just the team to really work hard. And whether or not we can get playoff success, I'm not sure. It's really going to have to depend on who we're playing. I feel like Pittsburgh's kind of got to raise that standard a little bit of, instead of just trying to squeeze into the playoffs, they get into that situation as like a fourth or fifth seed, where they don't have to play Kansas City. They don't have to play Buffalo. They don't have to play Baltimore right out of the gate. They can play somebody else. I feel like Denver could be a good team to play in that situation. I mean, either or, the playoff success we've had hasn't been the greatest against them, but I feel like we've been able to go that. And you never know. Maybe, we're playing the Las Vegas Raiders. One of their corners hits, the ball right out of midair, and then you just see Jalen Warren pick the ball up and take it for a touchdown. We're going to round two. So, you never know. So I feel like expectations are, I want the guys to go out there. I don't want this we're down by two scores, so that means we lost mentality coming into the second half. So I'm expecting the guys to work hard, and I'm expecting above a 500 record, just because that's what the football gods allow us.
Yeah, I would say my ceiling's 10-7. I like that. If this team can shoot for a 5 seed, I don't think the winner of the AFC South is going to be particularly good this year. I like the Texans. I love CJ Stroud, but I'll take this team against any of the AFC South teams. I don't care if Jacksonville has a surge. I don't care if Cam Ward is the best rookie quarterback in NFL history. I'll take this team against any AFC South team, and Steeler Nation is going to be at any of those stadiums. We saw Steeler Nation take over Jacksonville for the preseason game. We saw them take over Houston a couple years ago. I think they could take over Tennessee as well. So I think, if you can get that 5 seed, I think the Steelers can win a playoff game. And that's the ultimate goal for all of us. But in terms of what I realistically, 9-8, it's kind of a joke at this point. But I mean, this roster is pretty well constructed to at least go above 500. I have my qualms about the quarterback position, whether that be lack of experience or just lack of upside with Rodgers and Mason. I would love to see Will Howard play, but that seems like a bit of a long shot. And considering this roster is one of the oldest in the NFL, maybe it's a waste of time to give snaps to Will Howard. But in terms of players I'm looking at, number one is Joey Porter Jr. Like I said earlier, anytime the Steelers have a young, good secondary player, I just they automatically become one of my favorite players because I had to live through some terrible experiences where there were just some not great corners playing for the Steelers back in the mid 2010s. But with Porter, I mean, first year looked really good, showed a lot of promise. Felt like he had, he didn't have a bad year, but the penalty issue is still pretty blatant, and that's something he's going to have to fix because teams are going to start targeting that, and it's really going to be an issue. It's going to be a drive killer for the Steelers. I mean, 15 yards there, 15 yards there, it adds up, and especially when you're playing teams down the playoff stretch, you'll take all the yardage you can get. So looking to see a step up from him, and I believe in him as well. He's got two great veteran corners around him in Slay and Ramsey. Hopefully there's some mentorship there. But I also think there's a little less pressure on him this year with Slay taking over that number one boundary spot and then Porter on the other side. And then I'm assuming Ramsey in the slot. So there's going to be a lot less pressure on his shoulders. I expect him to have a better year. Hopefully he can clean up those penalties. And then in terms of other players that I'm looking at, obviously Harmon. I have a lot of high hopes for Harmon. He should be a good player. Fontanu, it's going to be really interesting coming off the injury. How's he going to look? Broderick Jones, this is a massive year for Broderick Jones. I wonder if the Steelers cut the plug on him if he does not perform up to his draft selection range and the players that were selected around him. If he's not performing to that level, you got to think Omar Khan's going to cut the plug and maybe sign a veteran tackle next offseason, because at what point do you got to get some good production at tackle? It feels like the Steelers haven't had that in so long. And then Roman Wilson, we talked about it. Expectations against Tampa Bay next week. But I think he's going to have a big year. If the Steelers want to win a playoff game, they need a receiver to step up. I think it's him. I believe in him too. Even as someone that's a bit sympathetic towards Ohio State, I'm a fan of him now because he's on my Steelers. But I'm expecting a lot of big things for him. He showed a lot of ability to beat man coverage in college, and I think that hopefully should carry over to the NFL. Because I mean, there's going to be times where DK Metcalf is going to be shadow covered by two corners, and it's going to be like,
Hmm.
okay, who's going to beat us here? I know they have Johnu Smith, but he's how much upside does he really have? So I think that wide receiver number two position is going to be big for the Steelers. And then other than that, I mean, I think overall the position group that I'm looking at the most, honestly, I really want to see something out of this offensive line. I mentioned Broderick Jones. I'm curious to see how Fonatano looks. Zach Frazier looks really good his rookie year. I think he's going to be a great center for the Steelers. Steelers have a lineage of developing center, so I think he's going to be the next in line. But if those tackle positions, man, if they can get those guys to perform at a average to above average level, I think this offense could have some surprising upsides. I mean, Caleb Johnson looked good against Jacksonville, had a cool stiff arm against Travis Hunter. I like his upside. I like Jalen Warren at running back. And I think if the quarterback play can just be stable enough to where they're not creating turnovers, they're making the right reads, and they're taking occasional risks, hey man, they could win 9 games. Maybe they somehow sneak into the fifth seed, play an AFC South team, you get your playoff win. So it's definitely not unreasonable. It's just certain guys are going to have to play up to a higher level that we have not seen in the past.
And yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where I mentioned as well as the work ethic has to be there. We kind of didn't see that fight, against Baltimore. It was one of the worst football games I remember, last year when we played the Eagles. I just remember crashing out about that. I was driving, and listening to Urinating Tree call the game, and it was just not the day that we wanted, and just it is what it is though. And I mean, when you look at the way this team has developed, it's definitely kind of like getting rid of that shell, of the old Steelers and kind of going into this new 2020s era that we've been wanting to see for so long, and a lot of other teams have made the jump, and we haven't quite yet. But it is good to see, with this, the way that our receivers are rolling and the way that they're kind of moving along. And even if there's things, that we're expecting, you can always expect the unexpected, with this team. And I mean, that 31-25 victory in Duval County really showed, I feel like, some positivity, but they're going to have to be like, all right, we worked hard. We did what we need to do. It's time to go to week 2. We're going to get Tampa Bay at Heinz Field.
Yeah, I do not feel like sitting through more days of our Steelers. Shout out urinating tree reference. I've seen too many days of our Steelers, and it's just too painful to watch. They're hilarious. It's great
Oh,
content. It's
yeah.
very informative. If you don't really know much about, if you're not following the Steelers very often, go watch urinating tree. It makes great videos on the Steelers. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. It feels like a big year, man. It really does. The Mike Tomlin retirement rumors, going out there and trading away Mika Fitzpatrick. I mean, this team, I don't want to say desperate, but this team is playing the cards, man. They are not being very Steeler like. And really, we've seen this pattern slowly and slowly. And now I feel like it's culminated into this team where there's just a lot going on and a lot of different, unsteeler like moves happening. I feel like it started with them firing Matt Canada in the middle of the season. I know Matt Canada was horrific and his offensive teams and his production was not great, but even still, that was very unsteeler like to fire a coordinator in the middle of the season like that. So it's good. It's good to see. I mean, the definition of insanity is just keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result.
Mhm.
And I feel like the Steelers aren't. So that's a good thing. But of course, that playoff win is all in our eyes.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's going to come eventually, but I'd rather it come sooner than later, and I mean, I'm really glad that we're putting in those pieces to try to get it now. And I mean, we just we really need to avoid those big three right now, Baltimore and Buffalo. Whether Baltimore's in a big three or not, is up for debate. But I mean, the two juggernauts right now of the AFC are the Kansas City Chiefs and they are the Buffalo Bills. And we need to realize that the AFC North is, I'd say, the toughest division in football, and we also need to realize that we have two generational teams right now that are going to be at the top of our conference, and we need to battle through that. We need to just find our ways, and even too, like if we're going to be at the bottom of the barrel, we remember Super Bowl 40, we were what? I believe the fifth, sixth seed, first Super Bowl team to win,
Yeah.
from that down low. I mean, it is possible. You just got to believe that. And I mean, that's what Pittsburgh's built on, man, is just defying the odds, just building from what you believe is impossible. I mean, Andrew Carnegie, I mean, if you want to be a history buff, the man who built the city, I mean, he derived on the impossible. And I mean, Pittsburgh is doing a lot, is striving for the impossible right now. And it's honestly kind of crazy to see.
Yeah, speaking of Carnegie and Steel, what do you think about those new throwback uniforms that dropped a little bit ago?
That I can't stand, I can't.
No?
Now, hear me out, hear me out. We just did a throwback similar to that. Now, you got to realize too, I really like the Bumblebee. I've been trying to find them on eBay. Haven't had any luck. So I
Yes.
wish I was a Bumblebee guy. So that's where I'm coming from on uniforms. But we did something similar to that in the 90s. I didn't really find it necessary. I'd say when it comes to throwback uniforms, if this is going to be a way blast in the past, the 1970s, we have our iconic home uniforms, but what nobody really talks about is our all white. The Bengals have an all white. A lot of teams
Yes,
have
the
kind
all
of
whites,
transitioned
yeah.
those white pants with the black stripe. We could make those old school but modern at the same time, and it'd look really nice. I'd say those, whether you want to do a white helmet or you just want to do the traditional, or maybe even the yellow helmet, those always look good, but I really wish we would have done like an all white style this year. And even too, because I believe I don't remember what game they said we're wearing them, but if it is a game two, I would assume it's in Pittsburgh. Most
Yeah.
sports teams until very recently wore white as their home uniform. So even if it's a home game, I feel like that'd still be like perfect to do?
Yeah, I agree with you. One thing I do want to see though, Dan, I don't
Hmm.
care if they wear purple uniforms for 16 games during the season. I just want to see block numbers. I want block
Hmm.
numbers on every single uniform throughout the entire season. I love the block numbers. Gray face masks, gray face masks like they had in the past. They wore against the Jets, or was it the Jets last season? The whole throwback uniforms. I love those. I love most throwback uniforms. And I kind of
Hmm.
get it, like you got to create new things. You don't always want to go in the past, but man, like for a team like us, we're so based in tradition, like the whole idea of only having the logo on one side of the helmet, like all these
Hmm.
things. I feel like tying it together with our past would just make things very nice.
Yeah, and it would. I could second the block number for at least one game. I'd really like that. Now, I will say the city will burn down if they change our home uniforms. I feel like, that's going to be etched in stone for the rest of humanity. Just and then too, the logo's iconic. I got throwback pennant there from the '60s, but the Steelers, I mean, if you look at their history, Art Rooney, starting in a boxing club. I just learned this very recently. Art Rooney was supposed to be a boxer in the Olympics and ended up getting sick or something. He couldn't go, and the man who ended up replacing him won the gold medal. And then later on, when that guy came back, they had a boxing match, and Art Rooney beat him. So learning that was really cool. But
Wow.
the history there for Pittsburgh, it's not, a Houston Texans. It's not a Jacksonville Jaguars. And we're throwing shade, that division again, but just the way that, the history of this division, Baltimore, I will say, the Cleveland Browns of the division now, nobody realizes this. The Cleveland Browns of this division is like 26 years old. They started in 1999. The Baltimore
Mm-hmm.
Ravens are the Cleveland Browns from 1947 on. So a lot of people don't get that like concept that just because the Cleveland Browns now kept the name of the old team, they're a very completely different franchise right now. And the Baltimore Ravens that have two Super Bowls now are the team that, had all the success, kicked our butts in the 50s and 60s, but, hasn't been able to pull through in the Super Bowl era. So that's part of why, too, that I don't give, the Browns that much hate because they've only been a franchise for 26 years and winning a Super Bowl is not easy.
It's definitely not. And I think another cool history buff about the Steelers is during the World War II era, the Steelers and the Eagles did not have enough players to form a team, so they both came together and were called the Steagles, which I think is
Mm.
really cool. Unfortunately, the Steelers haven't had much success against their, you can call it their former counterparts. But I think one thing that the Steelers, in terms of, building towards that success they had in the past, I think a lot of it is like I think partially they get a lot of hate, like the fact that Tom Brady, Bill Belichick were in the same conference as them for so many years, and really like it hurt us a lot. And granted, like it is a mark on some of our legacies that really we could never beat Tom Brady. Like the only year we went to the Super Bowl during that era was what the year Tom Brady got hurt, and then the year the Jets
Mm.
beat the Patriots in that AFC Championship. So it sucks that we've really never beaten Tom Brady in a major playoff game, and it looks like it's gonna might continue again with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. If the Bengals can ever get a defense, Joe Burrow could also be lethal as well. But I think the key is you cannot get back into that 7th seed, because if you get to that 7th seed, like you said, you're gonna be playing Kansas City, Buffalo, all on the road, and it's just not going to be good. Even if this team stays healthy and really runs that, they have a good playoff formula where, we're going to run the ball a bunch and we're just going to play good defense and we're just going to wear you out. Like, that's a good playoff winning formula, but, you don't ever want to, you don't want to play the Giants if you don't have to. You save that for the divisional and the championship game. And I mean, I love a home playoff game. The last home playoff game we had with fans was the infamous Jacksonville Jaguars complete collapse, where we were running halfback tosses on 4th and 1, and that whole catastrophe where that was. I still think I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but that was the hardest Steeler loss I ever had to stomach, because that team legitimately I felt like had a chance to win a Super Bowl. I know the Jesse James catch was brutal too, but like I felt
Thank
like
you.
as a team there was a lot of immaturity, and they were sort of looking past Jacksonville and looking at New England, they were set to play in the AFC Championship had New England won, which they did. And that was really, I think, the beginning of where people started questioning their culture. But I'd love to hear your opinion on what was the hardest Steelers loss you've had to stomach, either playoff, regular season.
That's a great question. I mean, I'll just start it off too, kind of going where you were beginning, of going on the road for a playoff game. That's going to be borderline impossible. My dad's a Bills fan. Like that, there's some pretty scary dudes. I mean, Buffalo, if it's January, 20 degrees in the snow, that's going to be difficult. Arrowhead's really loud. And you are 100% correct. Jesse James caught the ball. I will go to my grave saying that. I'm going to write it. I'm going to write it in my will. I'm going to be like, this
Yep.
goes to this person. This goes to this person. All my Steelers stuff can go here. Jesse James caught the ball and it's called Heinz Field. End of story. So, that's just the way it goes. Toughest loss, though. I really need to think about, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of losses that I remember, like, oh, that was bad. I remember a couple years ago when we lost to Buffalo. Like, I knew it was going to happen, but for some reason I had faith. It was just like processing that the season was actually over. Oh, no, I got it. That 11-0 season, the
Yeah.
way that we lost, I remember the Commanders when we lost to them. Absolutely horrific. I remember losing
Mm-hmm.
to I remember losing to Cleveland that year. You know what? That's going to be it. That Cleveland
Yeah.
Browns game in like what was it, 2021 in the playoffs that year was just
Yeah.
absolutely horrible, and I hated that.
It was. The reason why I didn't pick it was the team was skidding. I mean, they lost to what, a 3-win Bengals team, and Juju was dancing on logos. And by then, I'm like, oh, we're just done. This team is not going to go to a Super Bowl. I mean, they had utterly collapsed, due to a lot of reasons. The offensive line was really, the whole offense was non-existent, and the defense was all right, but it's an offensive driven league for the most part. And if you don't have production offensively, things are just not going to go well. I mean, we've had some tough ones. I remember a Lions game, I think 2021 or 2022. It was
Oh,
like
that was
raining and it was terrible weather. And the Lions were like 0-8. And then I think we tied them or something like that. some
Mm.
really bad ones in 2018. That 2018 season was an underrated bad season. That Saints game in 2018, that the bad Joe Hayden PI and the Juju fumble at the end of the game, that was heartbreaking because I'm
Mm.
pretty sure that pretty much eliminated us from having control of our own fate to go to the playoffs that year. We had a loss to the Raiders that season. I mean, and it was just an utter collapse that year. I think that's where like Days of Our Steelers. That's where I started watching. Where it was just like
It
8 straight
was. Oh
videos
yeah.
just documenting my pain during that season. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, I mean, we'll see. I just I hope it can happen. I've been hoping for so many years. But I think that, if you're looking on paper, especially defensively, this is one of the best Steelers defenses I've seen on paper in a while. Can they stay healthy? I don't know. Can the communication issues be fixed? I don't know. There's question on if that was Mika's problem or not. PQ came out, Patrick Queen came out and said it wasn't. So I guess it wasn't. Hopefully those are fixed up. So you should have a top five defense in the league, and it really comes down to what Arthur Smith and what this offense has going for itself, which I think is pretty much, very much so predicated on this offensive line. And if the offensive line could show up and stay healthy, then I think you could at least guarantee yourself a good run game, and then I think everything else should open up from there. So we'll see what ends
Oh
up
yeah.
happening, Dan.
It really could grow, and I mean they're at a good point where, the growth is relevant and the growth is there, and I mean, looking back and the difficulties we've had, I mean, I feel like too, we could have seven, if not eight, Super Bowls right now if you get rid of Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, but that's just the way football goes, and I mean, we've been that guy to some teams before. I mean, Roger Staubach, I believe he ended up getting a ring eventually with Dallas, but the 70s, we were there. We were one of the first teams to knock Minnesota off their pedestal, and here they are. Countless years later, they have yet to win a Super Bowl, So we've had excuse me. We've had moments where we're the ones getting knocked down, but we've knocked down other teams. But we always say this is our year, but I can tell that this is a year we're going to be remembering, whether for good or bad. And I mean, being at Heinz Field's really great. And I am curious too. How many Steeler games have you been to?
So I went to one last year, and then it wasn't. I don't think it was the year before. It might have been the year before that. It was the Jacksonville game at home where Kenny Pickett got hurt in the middle of the game. And then Trubisky came in, and then he stunk up. And then the Jacksonville players were waving the terrible towel around the stadium. And then the terrible towel, the Myron Cope curse hit them, and they fell apart to end that season. I think they were like 8-2 by the time they played us, and they just fell apart and missed the playoffs. Then, other than that, I went to a Browns game in 2018. Went to a Pitt game and saw Kenny Pickett against Clemson his senior season, so that was pretty cool. But just a couple for me. Um, yeah, there's been some rough years. So for a while there, I didn't want to go, but now it's something that I need to see now because I mean, this I'm pouring so much energy to it, and Acrisure Stadium's great. And being in Cleveland, I'm always around Browns fans, and I go to school in Cincinnati, and I'm always around Bengals fans. So it's nice to like look around and see some black and gold. But I thought to kind of sort of close this out, I wanted to get your opinion on maybe some rankings. The first one I had is all-time Steeler quarterback rankings. Now, obviously, there's only two
Okay.
guys, but for me, it's difficult because when you take a step back, yeah, Bradshaw won more rings than Ben. Playoff success, he's more successful. But if you look at the team he had, I mean, the '70s Steelers are one of the greatest dynasties in sports history. You look at
Hmm.
defensively, offensively, I mean, he had so much at his disposal. And if you look at Penn, particularly in '08, really offensively, there were definitely pieces there, but the offensive line was a question. I mean, there were definitely like, in '06 they had Bettis, they had Ward, but '08 they didn't have Bettis, and I felt like Ben really shined there. I mean, obviously that last drive, Santonio Holmes was a big part of that, but to get that
Oh
throw to
yeah.
the right spot, I think it's an interesting debate to be had. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
That's a good one. Yeah, Terry's better than Ben. That there's no question of that at all. Yes, I will say too that Mean Joe is the greatest Steeler in the history of our franchise,
I agree,
without
yeah.
question. Without Mean Joe, I don't know what happens, to our franchise. He really helped turn us around. Starting in 1969, he leaves in 1983. So a real long, unprecedented tenure, that we don't see in defensive players that often. But, to get back to you on that point, before we start our blind rank to close out the show like we did last time with Mitch, um, I'm gonna put Terry at number one without a doubt. I'm gonna put Ben at two, even though Ben deserves his flowers in so many ways, and so does Terry. But I do have to give it to Bradshaw mainly for his leadership, his tenacity. But we saw it too, Joe Gilliam was above Terry Bradshaw, and he had to work hard, to get that spot. Tommy Maddox was above Big Ben, and he had to work to get that spot early in his career. So, both had somewhat similar trajectories, both two very different eras. But at the end of the day, I will say that Terry both came too. If I know I'm going on a tangent here. Both two came from, schools that weren't the most recognized, Louisiana Tech and then Miami of Ohio for both the guys. So I will say that they're both very talented quarterbacks, but long story short, Terry is the best quarterback in our franchise history.
I agree. I definitely agree with the B. Joe Grease statement. I mean, without a doubt, and his effects are still felt today. I mean, a big reason why the Steelers are in the defensive formation they're in is because of Mean Joe Green. He really set the standard with that. But I think I don't know. I love Big Ben. Maybe it's personal bias. I mean, that last game he had against Cleveland, I mean, just that was,
It was beautiful.
it was kind of emotional, man. And I
Mhm.
had watched him play for so long. Like I had ridden with this team for so long. And I felt like Ben, what made me stand out with him, Bradshaw played in a different era, and I wouldn't classify Bradshaw as a guy that was very stat like either. He was very much win win win. I definitely agree with that. But I think if you look at Ben comparatively to the other quarterbacks that he played with in his era, Big Ben was not the type of guy that gave any crap about being in MVP voting or any of that. He just wanted to win. And he put his team first. I know, like you said earlier in this podcast, there's conflicting evidence on his leadership. He had a rocky start to his career, a lot of things going on off the field. And, for him to be able to come back and keep up his play all the way through as long as he did, pretty much, I would say through 2018, that injury in 19, I feel like that was it for him.
Mhm.
From him playing at a really, really high level. Bradshaw's great. I would say I don't know. I don't know if I could really decide. I feel like it's unfair for me to say because there's just too much bias. I wasn't around for Bradshaw and I was around for half of the Ben years, which, those Killer B years, that's some of the most fun I've ever had watching football.
Oh,
It
for
really brought
sure.
me into football. And watching him throw to Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant and Marcus Wheaton and all these players and Heath Miller, who I wish he would have played longer, but he unfortunately retired, and Deontay Johnson there for a little bit. It just, it's just I respect Ben, and we need the Steelers. Hopefully Will Howard's that guy, but long term wise, I'm very curious to see the direction they're going to go because at some point they're going to have to, either get lucky on one of these late round quarterbacks or officially commit to a tank, which I think Steeler fans would be a lot more open to if this season is successful. Like, kind of get that playoff win, and maybe Rodgers gets up for another year. I don't know,
No.
but next year usher in the Will Howard era, bring in some young talent, and see what happens.
I could definitely get behind that, with where they're gonna roll. The Killer B era, one of the growing up in that, I mean, you had to be there to experience
Mm-hmm.
it. It was unbelievable. I've been a Steelers fan since I was 2 years old, and starting out with going back, this has been the early 2010s, and then I remember Martavius Bryant, I remember Joe Hayden, I remember Ben, I remember Brown, I remember Bell, and those were, almost like bigger than life role models, and it's unfortunate the way that Ben and Bell's, or not Ben, Brown and Bell's careers kind of panned out. Ben kind of stayed and just left on a high note, which I feel like was the smart thing to do. And I mean, too, Antonio Brown ended up getting his ring, and it's just his attitude kind of came into the picture. He ended up having mental problems, with his brain after the Vontez Burfict incident. So I feel like we should cut him some slack, and but that kind of showboat era of Steeler football is gone. And I feel like that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because now we get a restart, we get a rebuild, and we're doing a lot of that this season, but it's kind of a curse too, but only more of in a personal sense because that's what we grew up with and that's what made football so fun.
Yeah, I can remember. I just like one specific Killer Bee moment that I remember was like I feel like the Killer Bees, the my favorite Bell moment was that Bills game. The Bills game in the snow was, I think, the most iconic Bell game. And then for Antonio Brown, the moment that pops up for me, I guess it's Roethlisberger and Brown. But when he caught that ball against Kansas City, I think it was a regular season game where the ball like kind of took a weird bounce and he still somehow corralled it and took it into the end zone. I mean, it felt like the Steelers were like the Steelers have always, at Urinating Tree, shout out again. He kind of always points out how the Steelers have some voodoo magic in the fourth quarter. But really, like back then, I mean, they were, end of games, man. That he always had a saying called "Here comes the high end talent," and it would never fail. They'd always come in clutch. So it's interesting. I think another player was Juju. Man, I really thought Juju
I
was
like
gonna
Juju,
be
yeah.
like, yeah, and it's cool to still see him around, but I really thought Juju was gonna be the next guy, and then unfortunately injuries really hurt his career too. But glad to see he was able to get a Super Bowl ring though with Kansas City.
Yeah, I'm glad he got one, and I mean that's just the way that the story ended up panning out for him. Bit of attitude here and there, like the TikTok dances, the Corvette, Corvette, and I mean if the amount of times I had to hear that was just difficult in myself, but and I loved Antonio Brown. He was my favorite Steeler at the time when I was watching. And I mean, I remember against Baltimore, that giant extension he just made, put in the end zone. I remember probably
Yeah.
being what? I would have been 7, 8 years old at the time, just running around my grandparents' house after that happened, almost trampling over family members, just ecstatic. But, you know, he was a great player, not the greatest person in the world, but that's what happens with athletes sometimes.
Yeah, and the whole saga with wide receivers being sort of divas, if you could say. I mean, I would first say that most receivers are divas because that's just how the position is incentivized. If you don't get a certain amount of targets or catches, and you're just, the stats aren't there, then your pay's gonna be a lot worse. Like I saw Jamar Chase talking about it. I'm like, you know what? Like it was cool to hear it from his perspective. Like I sort of do see that. But I think a lot of it was, they were able to find these guys, like George Pickens especially. If he hadn't had, first of all, that injury in college, and two, some of those issues like the Georgia State fight he had, he would have went a lot higher in the draft. And I have a feeling the Steelers wouldn't have been able to draft him. So that's one of those things where the Steelers for a while took that as a trade off. And I'm assuming just said, we can develop this guy, get him in the culture, get us in this locker room. We can have him develop. And the problem was that there just really wasn't anybody there that was, Ben was out there, he was, people question his leadership. But to me, if Ben, it's hard to ask a quarterback to mentor a receiver. I feel like you need a guy in the room to do that. And I feel like the Steelers, maybe not at the receiver position, but one of the reasons why I like the Will Howard pick so much is just general leadership in the locker room. I mean, if you watch any Ohio State games last year and some of the behind the scenes clips, so the guy's leadership is insane. And to be able to have a loss like that against Michigan and then come back and win a national championship and play great. I mean, his draft stock rose primarily because of that playoff run because he just played so well. And, we'll see how it goes. I think one thing that is kind of nice, though, is, you can't really use the argument that he had good receivers around him. He did. That's definitely true. But a lot of other great college quarterbacks that had great receivers around them end up doing really well in college. A couple LSU guys, Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and um, also Jaden Daniels, sorry, with Malik Neighbors and the Jacksonville receiver. I can't remember, Brian Thomas Jr. So we've seen guys perform in the league with great receiving talent around them in college. So I think it's Will Howard, like, he has the size, he has the intangibles. I think a lot of it is just, can he get a shot on this team? And I hope he can, because I really was excited about that pick. I thought he could be the next Brock Purdy for us. where the guy can legitimately start for us and be a borderline top 10 quarterback, but we can get that value late in the draft.
Yeah, and I mean that'd be phenomenal to get, and we're just gonna have to wait and see. Obviously, we'll have a lot to talk about when we get to Jackson, or when we get to Tampa, excuse me, another Florida team. We're going to be welcoming them to Heinz Field, and now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for, a bit of a game to wrap up the night. So I'll give one player, you give one, then Gabe, and then we're going to make our blind rank out of the five, and then, see who we'd like to change if there's any changes when we get there, and then wrap up and get to bed for tonight.
Sounds good.
Alrighty, so would you like to start us off with your first guy, or would you like me to go?
You can go first.
Alrighty. First one, we're gonna go Cordell Stewart.
Cordell Stewart. So you want me to just name a player now?
Well, you'd
Or you want
say
me to
one through
rank them?
five. Yeah, and then you'll name yours, and we'll get it going.
Cordell was cool. I felt like if he was drafted maybe 15 years later, he would have been, a lot more valuable. But I appreciated his time on the Steelers. I've seen a lot worse for my personal time watching the Steelers. I'll go 4.
All right, that's a good one. Who's your guy now?
Oh man, of all time in Steelers history, Deontay Moncrief.
Um.
It's kind of a layup.
Oh, I get that. Yeah, and then I'll go forward like you. I'll do that. Just to keep my options available because I feel like you could throw in a lot here that kind of derails the situation. Up next, I'm gonna go a guy we've talked about a lot tonight, Antonio Brown.
2.
Two. I like that. That was a bold,
I
confident
wanted to
two.
go
I like
1
that.
so bad. I wanted to go
Oh,
1 so
I get
bad,
that.
Dan. But you could throw out a Troy, you could pull out a Mean Joe Green. I mean, you could pull out a Woodson. Like, you never know.
Alrighty, who's yours?
Um, we'll go with Ike Taylor.
Ike Taylor. Ooh, that was a good one. Good corner. For the Steelers. Let's put him at three. Why not? Just I liked his assertiveness. I liked his energy that he brought. It seemed like an easygoing, nice guy. So we'll go Ike at three.
All right,
And then for my next one, we're gonna go a bit of a throwback here. Lynn Swan.
Lynn Swan, legend. I think, man, like obviously, if you're just looking at talent for talent, I think AB is a better player. But man, if you're looking at like all-time scope, I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, there's a lot of Steelers that are in the Hall of Fame. I can't put a guy that's in the Hall of Fame below Antonio Brown. I just can't. I gotta put him at 1,
I
man.
get that. I
I
get
don't
that.
care if I look delusional. It is what it is.
I'll take that. That's a good one. And so that'll put us both at well, I'll have three more and you got two. So who's your next one?
Okay, next one. I'll give you uh I'll give you Jack Lambert.
Ooh, I like Lambert. So I have my one, my two, and my three. I have my one, my
4,
two, and my
4.
four. That's what I was missing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna put Lambert at two.
Okay. Okay.
I feel like he was a good guy overall. I feel like you're gonna pull something crazy out here and just go with that. And then for my next one, I'm gonna go Lamar Woodley.
Oh, Woodley. So I got 1, 2, and
You
then
got
I think I have
three and five because
4.
you just put Lynn at one.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put who do I have at 4 again? I forget.
You got Cordell Stewart at four.
Yeah, I'll put Woodley at 3. I'll put Woodley at 3. He's a legend. He's on the team for a while. He's on some great Steeler teams. I'll put Woodley at 3.
Alrighty. I like that. And so I believe it'd be my either number one or number five is going to be
Okay. Okay, so this is a big contrast here. Um uh ooh, I'll give you Mendenhall.
Mendenhall.
Yeah.
I got to remember him a bit. I'm trying to think. Get back in
He
my
was the
head.
dude that had the fumble against Green Bay
Oh, yeah, that's right.
in that Super Bowl.
How could I
Yeah.
forget, man? How could I? He had a good one. I'm probably gonna get some hate for this. I have to put him at 5 though, because I'm
I
nervous
think
who
a
you're
lot
gonna
of
put at
Steeler
1.
fans would agree with you. No, I think a lot of Steeler fans would agree with you. I think that you know, top five hated
Who
Steelers. He's
who
up there.
knows?
So
And so this puts your number 5, and then I want to know who I have at number 1. But your number 5, Gabe, is T.J. Watt.
oh no, that's not good. That is not good. Well, it is what it is. They call it a blind ranking for a reason. Whatever, man.
That's right,
Whatever.
man.
I guess the Miles Garrett fans. I guess I just gained some Miles Garrett fans. I got some Browns fans now. So all right. So you're number one, Dan. I would say you kind of. I don't know if you would say lucked out, but I would say I had Terry Bradshaw. So like
Okay, I
not
can go
main
with
Joe
that.
Green, but like he's still you know
I
neck
like
and neck.
Terry. I have his jersey. I like Terry Bradshaw. So, if you were to redo it again, though, what would you change?
Well, obviously, I think it would, okay. I think I respect Win Swan, but I think at this point, like TJ Watt's pretty much a lock for the Hall of Fame. So I think I would go him at one, Lynn Swan at two, AB at three, Woodley at four, and then who did I have
Cordell
at
at
five
5.
again? Cordell at
Cordell's.
five. Yeah, I like Cordell. No hate to Cordell. It's just man, there's just a lot of good players on that list. Maybe you could put him over Woodley, but I liked Woodley for a while. Um, I thought Cordell. It was just unfortunate. He was just in the wrong era of football. I mean, he could have been
Yeah, he was.
one of the. Yeah, I mean, he would have been one of the best quarterbacks in the league right now if he was in our era. So, but how would
And
you do? How would you obviously? Well, your rankings. How would you, if you were to re-rank them? What would you have them as?
I'd have to go. I'd keep Terry at 1, I think. I might put Jack Lambert at 2. The impact he had on that steel curtain defense, I feel like that has to be noticed. I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
remember beyond those two. I have a short memory, man. I'm sorry. I gotta.
Mendenhall, Moncrief. If I were you, I'd go Mendenhall at what 4, and then Moncrief at 5. Moncrief was that was
I
not
was
a good
think
time for the Steelers.
I was thinking Moncrief at 4 and Mendenhall at 5, but I feel like yeah, that is a
Ooh.
good point. You could switch those around just the way that the guys played and that's the eras they were in, and whether or not the guys around them performed or not. But yeah, I like that. I like that concept that you got there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, TJ Watt, unfortunately, that was my bad, TJ. My bad. I gotta save the number one for TJ. So
And I love TJ too, so he's going to be a big piece. I'm really glad we were able to get his contract extended, and we'll get moving along for next week when we come back for episode 3.
yeah, thanks for having me on. This was pretty cool.
Yeah, you better believe it. Thank you so much for joining us, Gabe, as we close out tonight. Do you have any final thoughts?
If we win more than 9 games and we win a playoff game, then yeah, I'd be a very happy man. That's all I'm gonna say.
I'd be a very happy man too. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on episode 2 of the Steel Download Podcast. I'm Dan. He's Gabe. We're gonna see you all next Wednesday. See you later.